I'm here with Jane, and we're talking, and we're recording what we're talking. So you said to me, why now? Right?
Yeah, that's right. I was wondering, why is it important for you to be communicating this and to be putting it out there right now in your life?
Okay. So let me go back a little bit. I've spent much of my life troubled by life. I was a troubled soul who had kind of done everything. There wasn't a guru, psychologist, book, seminar that I hadn't done. Um, and when I had kids, which originally I had no desire to have kids, I felt there was enough of a mess of kind of souls that were around. And I thought, why do I want to contribute to that?
Yep.
But anyway, I ended up having two amazing young men, boys, twins. And I made a conscious decision to, as an experiment, raise them with the life that I was kind of working on or living. And it really was about an experiment. And I wanted to see what would happen. So when they were young, I would even, in the crib, the day they were born, I was talking to them about the fact that there were angels in them. I talked about consciousness and things. As they grew a little older, I deliberately shared with them about my life, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
I made a decision to let them know who I was and what I'd lived and what I'd been through. And at the same time, said that they don't have to live that life. It took years before one day Zach came back from school, and he was maybe at that stage already 10 or 11, and said to me, Dad, I can remember from a young age you would talk to us about this stuff, and I had no idea what you were talking about. And he said, but now I do. He said, I watch other kids, I watch parents, I watch the teachers, and I really understand what you're talking about. And most of all, I watch myself. And this led to eventually them asking me, why don't you write this or share this with others? Because they said, you have an amazing life now compared to what you've told us you've lived through, which is true.
Yeah.
I didn't have an easy time in my life finding joy or happiness. I would wake up in the morning and it was a struggle. Now, I had success in the traditional sense. I think it's important for that to be established.
What do you mean in the traditional way? Success in the traditional way?
So growing up as a teenager, although I was a troubled teenager, I was kind of cool. It was easy getting girls, and it was easy being part of different cliques, and I was good at sport. The only thing I wasn't great at was school, but didn't really matter. I passed and got through school. But on the surface, if you looked at me, and my siblings often did, life looked amazing. You looked at this guy, and what the hell was he struggling with depression and, suicidal stuff? Just didn't make sense. And then as I got older, when I went into work, I was successful. I did well.
Right.
It wasn't like I failed to get the job done. But none of that mattered because I was always troubled. I was not a happy person. I found it, from the moment I got up in the morning, it was a struggle. The days were struggles. I'd lie in bed at night and I would reflect. It was a struggle.
So when you say it was a struggle, because you were having lots of negative thoughts, or...
Yeah, I felt like, I used this phrase once with someone. I said I felt like the spawn of the devil.
That's a bit extreme.
Well, yeah. But at that
what
stage...
What do you mean you felt like you were born of the devil?
Yeah, because I spend most of the day dealing with feelings of anger, fear, rage, blame, uh, things that were just made no sense to me, but I felt them and I was aware of them, so I assumed they were me, and I was trying to fix them all the time.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
So the things that were causing you to feel those things, you were trying to make better,
Well, I was trying to make myself better because
make
obviously I
yourself
was the
better.
problem, and that was kind of different.
Oh,
But,
right.
I
Okay.
was the problem, so I took myself to um, experts, gurus, and people who I thought had it handled and they could help me to fix myself. I had no understanding at that point about actually what was really going on, and I had no understanding truly about the spiritual path, what that meant. The saving grace for me became actually a friend, a woman called Linda,
Yeah.
and we'll get on. We'll talk about her later. But Linda was the saving grace, and there were others, Esther and Abraham Hicks, and Francis and the Transformers. They saved my life,
Right.
and they made the life that my sons had better.
Yeah.
Um, Yet I also had to find it for myself. I really had to. I had to work this through for myself. Part of that was I was not a. I lived a life of paradox because I trusted too easily, and yet I always didn't trust something, if that makes any sense. So if someone said to me, oh, which they did, I worked with different people who gave me their philosophy, their interpretation of spirituality, of religious stuff, spiritual principles. I believed them, and my life was actually like a science lab. I was like the guinea pig. But it didn't really change what was there at the core. So although my life got better, I could handle things. I could get through the day, and I wasn't suicidal anymore. I wasn't self-destructive anymore. I'd lived that stuff. I'd done self-destructive stuff. I had um, done stupid things. I had lived stupid things, but I always seemed to survive them, and then I stopped repeating those patterns. But the core never changed. What was really inside there was a heaviness, a sadness, a disappointedness with life, and my life particularly. And there was a turning point, probably roughly maybe let's say 10 or 11 years ago. The boys were born already, but there was a major event that took place where my whole reference point and my faith in the spiritual path got shattered overnight.
Wow. What happened?
I made some choices and decisions that involved other people, and um, it all went haywire. But it wasn't about that going haywire. The actual circumstances weren't the issue. It was the being stunned and shocked that what I genuinely thought was my inner guidance leading me in that direction was shattered. And it took me a while to understand that actually wasn't the case.
What? Because you'd made some decisions and you thought that you were listening to your inner guidance,
Correct,
and
yeah.
actually you ended up in a bad place where those decisions.
Backfired and blew up.
Yeah.
Okay. And that wasn't at that stage, I didn't understand that actually that wasn't the case, but there was a lot of learning later that made sense to me when I started to understand this whole thing about vibration and energy. I'd heard it, I'd read books about it, I could even spout nonsense about it. But that's the thing that really got my attention, because I thought, okay, I know I felt 100% inside myself that this was the right thing to be going in that direction.
Right.
So why would it blow up?
Yes.
Didn't make sense to me. And it was only afterwards, and talking with Linda and exploring a few other things, I started to understand that my vibration would have to take me there, because that was what was going on. My energy at its core, the self-doubt, the not having faith and trust in myself, but thinking others knew better. These were the core issues. My questioning my intuition, my connection to my source. That was my vibration. My human vibration was made of that. That had to eventually blow up, because you can't defy gravity. We're going to talk more about that, but it was at that point when I made a decision, enough's enough, I'm going to go within, no matter what it takes, no matter how
Go
painful
within.
it is. Yeah, I'm going to go within. And I'm going to start creating a relationship with what's going on inside me, that nasty vibration, that nasty energy. And I'm going to allow, I made the decision, I know I believe in the source, I believe in God. My God, the way I interpret it is what I mean. I know the answers will come to me because they always have. The universe has always bailed me out. I knew that. So I thought, okay, maybe I need to really go in and trust and pay attention. Linda once said to me, um, everything you need is in you. And my response was I wanted to slap her. you know, um,
Poor
that's
Linda.
yeah, that's what came up.
Yeah.
And yes, poor Linda, because Linda's incredible unconditional ability to, you know, maintain a relationship with me no matter how many times. Not only did I metaphorically want to slap her in the face, I actually physically did, because I went to other people and gave them more power. I listened to what they said.
Yeah.
Because Linda was the only one who said to me, it's in you. The master's in there. And I'm thinking, you're full of it. I'm
Yeah,
the spawn
you
of
don't
the
be- you
I'm a
didn't
spawn
believe
I'm a
that.
spawn of the devil.
Yeah.
How can this be? The way I feel, how can that be something I could do? So anyway, that's what started, and that's what was I raised the boys with, and I would talk to them about. I still do. We have amazing conversations, and I would share stuff with them as I was going through the process. I would let them know what I was going through, and I would say to them, this is stuff I want to give you. I'm not asking you to be me, and I'm not asking you to even believe me. All I'm asking you to do is consider what I'm talking about and take the ideas and apply them in your life and see what happens. Because they already at that stage, as they got to like 10 and 11 or 12, I could see the change. I saw the humanness come out of them. So even though they grew up in a safe, secure environment with a lot of love and, mine and my partner's dysfunctions, they still had what a lot of people would love to have. And I could still see the humanness come out of them, the blame, the defensiveness, the fear, the self-doubt, the lack of self-belief starting to manifest, which does in every single human being on this planet.
Right.
No one, in my opinion,
No one escapes.
escapes that.
Uh-huh.
In spite of what religion and spiritual teachers want us to believe about the great masters, they could not have escaped it because it's not possible. The physics of it are not possible. And this is what I started to eventually understand. I started to understand my relationship with my source, with God, from the physics of it as opposed to the traditional teachings of it, if that makes any sense. Physics, literally the science of it.
Really?
Yeah. I understood and had read what Einstein had talked about the universe, and Einstein had talked about spirituality. So I knew there must have been something about the physics of it. And we'll talk more about that, but I started to talk to them about that. I had come across somewhere, because I'm not someone who did much reading of it, but I came across something that there were two things the Sanskrit teachings taught. That was the responsibility of a parent, as well as all of us. Two things. To raise and teach your kids about spiritual or universal conscience.
Mm.
We'll talk a little more about that. And the other one was what was considered a great sin, if you want to use it in inverted commas, that would stop us from finding the kingdom of God, was interfering with the soul or the journey of another. And those two really got my attention with my kids, because I realized I'm going to interfere as a parent in the traditional sense, and even the non-traditional sense. I'm going to interfere with their path, because I'm going to be always the one deciding what is right for them in the name of love and so on. So I decided those were two things that became very powerful for me. I would talk to them from a young age about go within right now, what you just done to your brother or what you just done there. Does it really feel good to you inside? Does it make you feel connected to love, to God, to the universe? And they would say no. And I'd say, okay, so it's in there. You know where to go inside yourself. And they started to understand that,
Wow.
And also, I would say to them, look, I'm going to give you stuff, but it doesn't mean you can't challenge me. I never ever said to them, you can't speak to me like that because I'm your parent. I did say to them, you haven't earned the right to say that in that way. Meaning, don't be rude and disrespectful, because I don't want you being like that to anyone else. But you have a right to say, Dad, I don't agree, or sorry, you shouldn't have said that to me. The number of times
Yeah.
my sons have said to me, you had no right to say that to us that way, or to someone else. You know, only the other night my son turned around to me and said, why did you speak to that person like that? It's great. I love it, you know, because they help me stay awake and present,
Yes.
you know. And so the experiment was something, and they have said to me, by the way, I've had a lot of people in my life say to me, why didn't you do books? Why didn't you share this? And you know, I've said, look, because I feel like a bit of a hypocrite and a fraud. I haven't got this mastered. I'm not a enlightened being here on the planet Earth. And I started to question that, and other people who I trust said to me, yeah, but you see, that's part of the problem. Because you're thinking you have to be perfect before you can share with others. You said it to me, and others said it, and yes, I did believe, but I'm not saying I also feel like I was wrong. There was a point I wanted to get to where I knew it would be okay to be imperfect, a spiritual being still in a body screwing up, but I could share something that would make a difference. And it was probably seeing my two sons and hearing what other people say about them, because that's the important thing. It's not what I think. Because in fact, my perception is so messed up that it's fabulous to realize that 80% of what I perceive in the world ain't accurate.
Right.
And I'm not exaggerating, you know, and I laugh with them about it, because I'm not the one who sees my superstar kids. I'm the one who sees what my kids aren't getting right. You know, I'm more that kind of parent. Particularly, they love baseball, and anyone who understands baseball knows that baseball you get immediate feedback from. So if you ain't doing well, it shows up immediately, you know. There's other things in life you can get away with it for a period of time, all right? So they've been great teachers in that. But I look at how their teachers from the day one of school, coaches, parents interact with my sons. And I thought, wow, they see my kids so differently, okay? Because they get the real kids. I mean, I get other kids come to our house, and I get the real kids because they're not around their parents. And it's quite frightening, you know.
Yes.
I often see that the fact is because they feel safe with my wife and I, that they can express themselves, these other kids. So they go crazy, all right? I know at school how many kids go to school and act out because of what happens at home. They don't get a chance to express a single thing. And then they just go nuts at school. They've all got nowadays ADH and DDH and all these BBC and you name it. They've got every single label possible.
Yeah.
It's actually all about consciousness. Okay? The need for them to express themselves, as we all have.
So when your children are with others, do you think they go mad, or do you think that?
Well, according to what I'm told by parents who say to my wife and I, God, we love, like sometimes if we used to pick your sons up at school and take them home. They actually have a conversation with us. Our kids don't. They do. They make us laugh, you know. They sometimes sing in the car. They enjoy it. Teachers have said, it's the number of times I've heard teachers say, God, we love it when your boys are in class with us. They're respectful. They listen. They interact. You know, they're not perfect. You know, they also have their little boy stuff, but it's like different. You know, baseball coaches have endlessly said to me, their maturity levels are extraordinary. You know, and yet they're not mature in the sense of where people of 16-year-olds trying to act like they're 30. What they are is they're mature in the sense that they own what's going on with them. They know when they're feeling defensive. They know when they're blaming. They know when they're feeling angry, and they deal with it. They are kind to other kids. They encourage other kids. They are generous with other kids. And they're aware that they're not in la la land. They see
No,
it.
they're in my experience, they're very astute.
Yeah.
So they don't miss much
No.
that's going on. You know, they're not completely sucked in by what's going on the surface. They look below that.
So they, for example, they can see when a kid is, you know, is, as they call it nowadays, they've got names for these things that they call kids, okay? they don't judge it. They just say, hey, he's like that. And some of them they're really good friends with. They just don't get sucked into the drama of it,
Yeah.
you know. And they just let them be. And if a kid turns around and asks them for input, they'll give it to them, you know.
Yeah.
One of my kid's friends turned around to my kid the other day and he came home and he said to me, Dad, you know, Jake said to me, I notice you don't express a lot of emotion. And Zach said, I don't express emotion. It doesn't mean, I know I feel sometimes angry, I feel scared, but I don't feel I have to act it out and express it to everyone else. It's not their problem. I deal with it. And I said, okay, but do you think maybe he was talking about you could be more joyful because that's quite a powerful emotion? And Zach said, yeah. And I said, so, you know, go away, reflect on that, do some meditation, go inside and ask yourself, you know how to do it. Ask yourself, why do I find it hard to be joyful? And he did, and he came back and told me what it was about. And I said, wow, isn't that great? I said, I apologize to you, Zach, because the reasons why you feel you can't be joyful, I've had all my life, so I've probably passed some of that on to you. But even bigger than that, I want you to understand that there isn't a human being that's not going on with. It's been in the human imprint for thousands of years.
What's going on with?
Feeling undeserving, unworthy because of what he's feeling. Because
Is that why he said he couldn't?
yeah,
be
he just felt
joyful?
he felt he didn't deserve to be happy and joyful
Oh.
and express it.
Right.
He didn't feel that he had he didn't feel, because he has sometimes days where he feels self-doubt in himself and he has he has the struggles you have living your life. He felt he didn't have a right to be joyful.
So
and-
he's not perfect, so he can't be joyful.
Yeah. And I said to him, I apologize, you've picked up some of that from me. And I asked him to do an exercise so he could determine something. I said to him, try this out. I said, do a scorecard on yourself. I said, because you're mature enough to be objective. I said, so on the one side, have things like kindness, respectful, some values that I know are important to you, Zach. See how you do in relationship to other people in the world with that. And on the other side, have meanness, blaming, always making excuses, which a lot of people do. And I said, see how you score on that side. How much of the time are you doing that? And then when he looked at that, I said, so do you think that's not a reason you shouldn't love and appreciate yourself? Look at the score on the one side compared to the score on the other side.
So what were the scores?
He had to admit that he scored pretty well on the
On the value side.
on the value side. Okay, not perfect, but he scored damn well.
Yeah.
On the other side of the meanness, blaming everyone, always making excuses, he realized, honestly, he scored pretty low on that. Okay?
Yeah.
Didn't score 0, but he knows that's not what he does. I said, okay, so if you were looking at that kid
Yeah.
and you were coaching them,
Yeah.
or you were parenting them, or you were their psychologist, what would you say to them about who they are? And he said, no, it's pretty damn good. I said, well, so let me ask you a question. I said, do you understand that you as a human being appreciate and like it when people acknowledge you, they praise you? And he said, yes. He likes it when the coaches tell him he's doing great, or the teacher says you're doing
Yeah.
great. If I tell him he's doing great. I said, yeah, it's about every single person I've ever met on some level wants that. And I said, but do you understand that the problem is that energy, that love, that kindness, your values, that's spirit. That's the kingdom of God that Jesus was talking about. That's the God consciousness. If you don't start acknowledging it and you don't start focusing on that and realizing it's in you, the other stuff, the meanness, the fear, the self-doubt, that's the human consciousness that's been around for tens of thousands of years. I know for a fact because my father had that. I know my grandfather had that. And by the way, I know how many people out there have it because I see the world we live in today.
Right.
And I said, that's the one you want to start learning to let go of more. I'm working on that every day. I didn't realize how much I identified and believed that was me because the world reflects it back to you and you start believing it more and more. This starts, by the way, I reckon it starts for human beings probably by the time they are 5, 6, or 7. It starts growing stronger. All right? It just is. It's just the way it is. It's just like gravity. Anyway, so that's why I felt it was maybe time to start doing it, because I've seen them, and I've also seen my own life, you know.
So, I mean, perhaps not in this conversation, but later. Um, I'm just thinking that you could say, well, what you need to do then is just be kind.
You
And
could.
there's a lot of people saying that. You know, a lot of
Correct.
people
There's
say,
a lot of people saying be
you know,
kind.
what we need to do is be kind, be inclusive, take care of people, and then it's all going to be all right.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, it ain't, because just like I said earlier, even with my connection to my source that I've worked on, and it's been pretty good all my life, it still led me into a path of pain, because my vibration, the human vibration, was much stronger than my spiritual one. That's the part that, you see, you can be kind. There are some people out there who are so kind that they have given up every bit of their soul to get love from others, to be liked by others, to be approved of by
Right.
others. And they may, their lives suck like hell. And they're a pain in the arse to others, because they're always telling others what to do. They're always wanting to control others. They're always wanting others to like other people. They're always wanting others to like them. That's what the world's actually doing right now. Everyone wants everyone to be the same. That's the Sanskrit teaching about messing with the soul of others will stop you finding the kingdom of God. Because the kingdom of God, as far as I'm concerned, is actually the consciousness of the universe, the source of all life, the creator of all that is, whatever you want to call it, Yahweh, I don't mind, Buddha, enlightenment. You can come up with every name, because every spiritual teaching actually that was real had a reference to this level of consciousness, the energy, the physics of the universe, which is unconditional love. It doesn't have the faculties we have.
Right.
But we'll talk more about that.
Yeah.
At this stage, we were looking at, like, why now?
Why now?
Okay. So,
So why now really is a response to your boys saying, why don't you tell other people as well?
yeah. And the sense that there've been others who've
Yeah.
said, it really is time to put that out there.
Yeah.
And I made a decision. I want to do it differently. I'm not out to market it. I'm not gonna be calling you and other people and say, could you please write a reference about me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just gonna put it on a YouTube page. And if the universe feels this is the right thing and it's gonna help others, even if one person reads and listens to some of the stuff and says, hey, this is pretty good, and refers it to someone else, then it'll be out there. But whatever happens is my boys will always have it. And that's, for me, an extraordinary privilege. I've written them letters. My wife suggested to me, why don't you write some of the stuff down in letters to them?
What a lovely idea.
So that's how this process really started. She said, why don't you write the stuff down? Write to them. Pick one theme, and, they're at boarding school. We see them, obviously, but I would write, them a letter, and then I would send it to them, and then we would talk about it, and they would ask questions, or they'd give comment, and I would allow them to practice it and see what happens, and I would observe, and I would work on my non-judgment, observing them without judging, and seeing were they integrating it, did it matter to them? We've had extraordinary conversations. I've challenged them. I said, look, given how I want to, my human parent wants to have some control over you, because I'm meant to have some control over you. I'm meant to guide you, so they tell me, all right? And I've talked to them about that, and I said, so there is going to be some of that, and you can do with it the way you want to. I said, but I also understand, and I want to walk the path of letting you be two souls who walk in your own path. And I am at peace with the fact that you may not want any of this. You may want to go and live a life that is completely the opposite of what I'm trying to share with you. And I've had to work through my heartache around that. I've had to process the resistance in me to you doing that, the judgments that would come about. I suppose it's like a parent who finds out maybe their kid's very different from them. All right, I've worked through all of that and I still do, but I have done a lot of conscious work on that path, and I realized that that was important. It was part of what I wanted to give them. And I asked them regularly for feedback. Many times I've sat down and I said, okay, give me some feedback about how I'm doing as a parent. And, someone could say, yeah, but they're not going to say something to you. My wife did once say to me, they're probably quite scared of your approval.
Mm.
And it was quite funny because they asked her. She asked them, sorry.
Yeah.
I said, well, why don't we sit down and have this conversation? It'll be great. Because if I am doing something that's scaring them and you think they're just saying yes because they're scared of dad, I said, it's a really important thing to do because I had that relationship with my father. I don't want them having that. So we
No.
sat down and we had this conversation, and they both burst out laughing, and they turned around to Mom and said, Mom, if we were scared of Dad, would we actually tell him F you sometimes when we think he's treading on our turf? Is that the sign of someone scared? Do you think we're scared of Dad if we sometimes say, Dad, you shouldn't have spoken to people like that, or you shouldn't have said that? And you can't argue that because, God forbid, I ever said that to my dad. I would have been murdered. Okay?
Yeah.
And they said no, not at all. Actually, there's nothing we're scared of saying to Dad. And yes, we're aware that we sometimes want his approval, but we've talked about that. And he's often turned around to us and said, look, Joel once came to me after a baseball game and said, I can see you feel disappointed.
Yeah.
I wanted to lie to make him feel good and make myself good and say, no, I'm not disappointed. So I said, yeah, I do feel disappointed. I said, but that's about me. I said, really important, Joel, get this. Don't own it. You'll want to own it because something's going to come up in you that's like of the human part. It's going to be connected to the love you have for me. Because out of the human love, you're going to. I said, you must be strong in saying this is not about me. That's about Dad, and laugh at it. Laugh at it in yourself. And I'm working on it, Joel. And he's noticed over the last 2 or 3 years, they both have, how different I am in relationship to the baseball, because that's the big one. It's like, it's the one that probably pushes my most buttons, funny enough, with them. And I think actually I've made enormous progress in it through these principles, actually. And interestingly enough, watching them flourish and knowing it has nothing to do with me is quite extraordinary as a father,
Yes.
Because I don't want to own it. In other words, it's because of me you're great. You're good. I do understand a father wanting to do that because it's part of the human
it's a reflection
thing.
Of
Yeah,
you.
but it's so amazing. I'm not saying I haven't contributed to them because I don't want fathers or someone to think that means you can't. No, I've done it in the way I've done it. All right, I've shared stuff with them and given them a chance to make their lives. I've said, look, by the way, you want to have a great life, you're going to have to overcome me and your mother. And they said, wow, what does that mean? And I said, by overcoming it, I mean you're going to have to identify in your energy field, in your consciousness, the things that hold you back, the beliefs that tell you can't have something, you can't do something, that are actually not yours. They're more likely ours. They come from us. That's going to happen by being in the family dynamic. There's no escape from that. And then you can say, well, wait a minute, on what basis am I going to not live what I want to live because of that? And you're going to face feeling guilty because part of you will think, well, that's because you don't like disloyal.
To your parent.
Yeah, you know how many times I was told by my father I was disloyal because I walked a path I wanted to walk with. And I said to them, look, there are some things that would cross the line and I wouldn't hang out with you, but it doesn't mean change anything, No,
I think you're talking about your own beliefs about what's possible and what's not possible that you've inherited from
Yes.
your family.
And from being in the human consciousness.
And being in the human consciousness.
Yeah.
And your boys have to overcome that and think, just because he believed it and I love him doesn't mean to say that's a limiting thing for me.
Correct. Anyway, I think let's wrap this one up and then we can, if we choose, talk a little bit about something else.
Brilliant.
Jane, thank you for your time.